the thick, freezing fog of the Lorraine region in eastern France clung to the rolling hills like a wet shroud on the morning of September 18th, 1944. Through this impenetrable grey soup came a sound that would freeze the blood of any infantryman. It was the deep, guttural roar of Maybach Fev-12 engines, accompanied by the distinct metallic squeal and clatter of wide steel tracks crushing the autumn earth. Out of the mist emerged the angular, terrifying silhouettes of German Panzerkampfwagen, 5 Panthers. These were not the battered remnants of the Normandy retreat, but a massive, brand-new armoured fist hurled directly at the exposed flank of George S. Patton's Third Army. History often tells us that American tanks in World War II were hopelessly outmatched death traps, and that German heavy armour was an invincible force of engineering brilliance. But what happened over the next 11 days around a small French farming town called Arracourt would completely shatter that myth. It was the largest tank battle on the Western Front up to that point, a brutal, point-blank armoured slaughter, where American tactical brilliance met German steel head-on. Welcome back to the channel, where we strip away the Hollywood myths and dig into the raw, unvarnished truth of military history, strategy, and tactics. If you want to understand the brutal mathematics of warfare, the engineering behind the machines, and the minds of the commanders who sent men into the meat grinder, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. We rely on viewers like you to keep this channel firing on all cylinders, so join the ranks and let us get into the trenches. To understand the sheer scale of the violence that was about to unfold at Arracourt, we have to rewind and look at the massive strategic chess match playing out across Europe in the late summer of 1944. Following the devastating breakout from the Normandy beachheads during Operation Cobra in late July, the American military machine had uncoiled like a massive steel spring. General George S. Patton's Third Army was spearheading a relentless, high-speed pursuit across France, tearing through disorganized German defenders with a speed that shocked even the most optimistic Allied planners. The American armored divisions were executing a textbook mechanized exploitation, covering dozens of miles a day, bypassing strongpoints and leaving chaos in their wake. But this blistering pace came with a fatal mathematical flaw. You can outrun the enemy, but you cannot outrun your own logistics. By early September, the Third Army was literally running on fumes. The Allied supply lines stretched all the way back to the artificial harbours in Normandy, hundreds of miles away. Despite the superhuman efforts of the Red Ball Express, a massive convoy system where 73 truck companies operated 24 hours a day, hauling thousands of tons of supplies over a one-way loop highway, the math simply did not add up. A single American armored division on the move consumed up to 600,000 gallons of fuel a day. When the fuel trucks could not keep up, Patton's mighty armored spearheads ground to a sudden, frustrating halt near the Moselle River in the Lorraine region. This operational pause was exactly what Adolf Hitler was waiting for. Sitting in his bunker in East Prussia, staring at maps detached from the reality on the ground. Hitler saw an opportunity that mirrored his early triumphs. He ordered a massive, concentrated armoured counteroffensive designed to slice into the exposed southern flank of the Third Army, cut their supply lines, and destroy Patton's forces in detail. Hitler's logic was a desperate gamble, much like Confederate General Robert E. Lee's decision to launch Pickett's charge at Gettysburg. Both commanders believed that one massive, aggressive, concentrated blow could shatter an enemy that held all the logistical and material advantages. But moving ghost divisions across a map with a colored pencil does not magically put fuel in their tanks, nor does it train the men sitting inside them. Hitler ordered the formation of new Panzer Brigades, specifically the 111th, 112th, and 113th, to form the spearhead of this attack under the banner of the 5th Panzer Army. Commanding this force was General Hasso von Manteuffel, a brilliant, aristocratic Prussian cavalry officer who was a master of mobile warfare and one of Germany's most capable tactical commanders. Manteuffel knew exactly what he was up against, but his hands were tied by orders from Berlin. Let us break down the formidable, yet deeply flawed, weapon that Manteuffel was handed. The German Panzer Brigades of late 1944 were a radical departure from the balanced panzer divisions of the early war. They were heavy on armour, but critically starved of everything else. These brigades were equipped with the formidable Panther tank, a machine that, on paper, was the apex predator of the battlefield. The Panther tipped the scales at nearly 45 tons. Powered by a Maybach HL 230 P30 V12 engine pushing out roughly 700 horsepower. Its main armament was the devastating 75mm Kubelik 42 L70 gun. This weapon had a muzzle velocity of over 3,000 feet per second, allowing it to punch through more than 5 inches of armor at 1,000 yards. To put that into perspective, it could easily penetrate the front armor of a standard American Sherman tank from well beyond the Sherman's effective return fire range. Defensively, the Panther was protected by a heavily sloped frontal glacis plate, 80 millimeters thick, but angled at 55 degrees, giving it an effective thickness of nearly 5.5 inches of solid steel. From the front, it was a mobile fortress. However, the Panther had severe mechanical and operational drawbacks. Its complex overlapping roadwheel suspension, known as the Schachtel-Laufwerk, provided a smooth ride and excellent weight distribution. But it was a nightmare in the muddy conditions of Lorraine. Freezing mud would pack between the wheels overnight, literally freezing the tank to the ground. Furthermore, the Panther was plagued by a fragile final drive and transmission system. The Panther was a marvel of engineering, assuming you only needed to drive it in a straight line on a paved road, and had a spare transmission handy every 100 miles. But the biggest weakness of Manteuffel's new Panzer Brigades was not mechanical, it was human. The crews manning these magnificent machines were incredibly green. Many were young recruits pulled straight from training schools or Luftwaffe ground personnel hastily converted into tankers. They had barely any time to train together as a unit, let alone master the complex gunnery and tactical maneuvering required in a chaotic armoured brawl. Worse still, these Panzer Brigades lacked organic, mechanised infantry, adequate artillery support, and reconnaissance units. They were a blunt instrument, a glass cannon sent into the field without a shield. This lack of combined arms integration was a fatal flaw, reminiscent of the unsupported early British tank charges in North Africa, where armour advancing without infantry was easily isolated and destroyed. Waiting for this German juggernaut was the United States 4th Armoured Division, commanded by Major General John S. Wood. Wood was an aggressive, forward-thinking commander who earned the 4th Armoured the nickname of Patton's Best. The American armoured doctrine was fundamentally different from the German approach. The U.S. Army did not rely on heavy, slow-moving breakthrough tanks. Instead, they built a highly mobile, mechanically reliable, and logistically sustainable force. The 4th Armoured Division was a masterpiece of combined arms integration, operating in flexible task forces known as combat commands. At Arracourt, the brunt of the German attack would fall upon Combat Command A and Combat Command Reserve, led by the brilliant and aggressive Colonel Bruce Clarke. Clarke was an engineer by trade, a man who understood terrain, geometry, and the mechanical limits of his machines better than anyone. The primary weapon of the American armoured force was the M4 Sherman medium tank. Weighing in at around 30 tons, the Sherman was powered by a variety of incredibly reliable engines, including the 500 horsepower Ford GAA V8 in the M4A3 variants. While the Sherman's frontal armour was only about 2 inches thick, sloped to provide roughly 3.5 inches of effective protection, its true strength lay in its reliability, speed, and ergonomics. The Sherman had a fast-traversing turret, excellent optics, and a gyro-stabilizer that, while complex, allowed for better target acquisition on the move compared to its German counterparts. Most Shermans at Arracourt were equipped with the standard 75mm M3 gun. This gun was exceptional for firing high-explosive shells at infantry and anti-tank guns, but it struggled immensely against the frontal armour of a Panther. How do you stop a 45-ton steel monster when your own gun cannot pierce its front plate at standard combat ranges? You do not fight him head-on. You outmaneuver him, you blind him, and you shoot him in the side. To supplement the Sherman, the Americans also brought the M18 Hellcat tank destroyer to the fight. The Hellcat was the hot rod of the U.S. military, a lightweight, 18-ton vehicle powered by a Wright R975 radial aircraft engine. It boasted a blistering top speed of up to 55 miles per hour on roads, making it the fastest tracked armoured vehicle of the entire war. Armed with a high-velocity 76mm gun, the Hellcat could easily destroy a Panther if it could maneuver into a flanking position. But the Hellcat's armour was practically non-existent, barely half an inch thick in places, meaning it could be destroyed by heavy machine gun fire or a near miss from an artillery shell. The American tactical doctrine relied heavily on the integration of these armored vehicles with mechanized infantry riding in M3 half-tracks, supported by self-propelled artillery that could drop a barrage on a target within minutes of a radio call. This was the precursor to the modern airland battle doctrine we saw executed flawlessly during Operation Desert Storm in 1991. Just as the 3rd Armoured Cavalry Regiment at Battle of 73 Easting used superior situational awareness, integrated artillery, and speed to dismantle a dug-in Iraqi armoured force, the 4th Armoured Division at Arracourt relied on coordinated combined arms to offset the technical superiority of individual enemy tanks. But the American forces had one massive, overwhelming advantage that was about to be stripped away from them by the environment itself. Throughout the campaign in France, the U.S. Army relied heavily on close air support, specifically the rugged, heavily armed P-47 Thunderbolt fighter bombers of the 19th Tactical Air Command. These aircraft acted as flying artillery, spotting enemy concentrations and devastating them with 500-pound bombs and 5-inch rockets. The Germans were terrified of the Jabos, the fighter bombers that made moving in daylight a suicide mission. But as September rolled on, the weather in Lorraine turned foul. A thick, heavy fog rolled into the valleys, accompanied by driving rain that turned the terrain into a slick, muddy nightmare. Visibility dropped to mere yards. The airfields were socked in, and the mighty P-47s were grounded. The American armored forces were suddenly blind from the sky, stripped of their aerial shield. The battlefield at Arracourt was characterized by rolling hills, shallow valleys, and small farming villages connected by narrow dirt roads. It was a terrain that offered excellent hull-down positions for defending tanks, but the fog negated any long-range advantage the German guns possessed. This weather condition turned what should have been a long-range gunnery duel into a terrifying, close-quarters knife-fight fight in a phone booth. The stage was set for a massive collision of two completely different military philosophies. On one side, the German 5th Panzer Army, wielding the heavy, technologically advanced but logistically fragile Panther tanks, crewed by inexperienced men and lacking infantry support. On the other side, the American 4th Armored Division, utilizing lighter, highly reliable Shermans and Hellcats, crewed by battle-hardened veterans executing a flawless combined arms doctrine, backed by the unstoppable industrial might of the American homeland. The factories of Detroit, producing thousands of tanks on assembly lines like Ford's Willow Run, and the Chrysler tank arsenal, were directly pitted against the artisanal, over-engineered manufacturing hubs of the German Ruhr Valley. It was a clash of mass production and tactical flexibility versus heavy engineering and desperate aggression. As the dawn broke on September 18th, the men of the 4th Armoured Division's cavalry reconnaissance squadrons sat in their light M8 Greyhound armoured cars, shivering in the damp, freezing fog. They could not see more than 50 feet in front of them, but they could feel the ground trembling. The squeak of tracks and the heavy rumble of engines echoed through the mist, bouncing off the hills and making it impossible to pinpoint the enemy's exact direction. General Manteuffel had unleashed his panzers, and the ghost divisions were suddenly very, very real. The lead elements of the German 111th Panzer Brigade crashed blindly into the American picket line near the small village of Bezange-la-Petite just before 0800 hours. The first American units to make contact were the lightly armed M8 Greyhound armored cars of the 42nd Cavalry Reconnaissance Squadron. The Greyhound was a fast, wheeled vehicle designed for scouting, not for slugging it out with heavy armor. Its main armament was a 37mm cannon, a weapon so underpowered against late-war German tanks that American crews mockingly called it the squirrel rifle. When the massive silhouettes of the Panthers loomed out of the fog at a range of less than 75 yards, the cavalrymen did exactly what their doctrine dictated. They fired a few desperate, bouncing shots off the impenetrable frontal glacis of the German beasts, popped smoke grenades, and used their superior speed to fall back, furiously radioing warnings to the main armoured columns. The ghost divisions had materialized, but they had stumbled directly into a meticulously laid American trap. To understand why the ensuing slaughter happened the way it did, we must dissect the mechanical realities of fighting a tank battle in near-zero visibility. When the fog of Lorraine reduced the battlefield to a claustrophobic arena, the theoretical advantages of the German Panther tank instantly evaporated. The Panther was designed for the vast, open steppes of the Eastern Front, where its high-velocity 75mm gun and thick frontal armor could destroy Soviet tanks from over a mile away. Its optics, specifically the TZF-12A binocular gun sight, were magnificent pieces of precision glass, engineered for long-range sniping. But in a heavy fog, looking through that sight was like trying to navigate a dark room while looking through a drinking straw. Furthermore, the Panther suffered from a fatal mechanical flaw in close-quarters combat. Its turret traverse mechanism was hydraulically powered, but it was directly linked to the engine RPM. If the driver was idling the engine to conserve fuel or listen for enemy movement, the turret moved at a painfully slow crawl, taking over a minute to complete a full 360-degree rotation. In stark contrast, the American M4 Sherman was practically built for a knife fight. The Sherman utilized an independent electric or hydraulic turret traverse system that could whip the main gun around a full 360 degrees in just 15 seconds, regardless of what the engine was doing. Additionally, American tank commanders enjoyed vastly superior situational awareness. The Sherman was equipped with a commander's cupola featuring spring-loaded periscopes that provided a wide, clear field of view without forcing the commander to expose his head to enemy fire. How do you kill a beast that you cannot see until it is 50 feet away? You see it first, you turn your gun faster, and you shoot first. In armored warfare, the tank that lands the first shot wins the engagement over 80% of the time. This dynamic made the Battle of Arracourt incredibly similar to the brutal, point-blank naval night battles of Guadalcanal in 1942, in the pitch-black waters of Iron Bottom Sound. American destroyers using early radar systems were able to ambush heavier, superior Japanese cruisers because they had the technological edge in situational awareness and reaction time. At Arracourt, the Sherman's fast turret and superior periscopes acted as that critical edge in the blinding fog. As the German Panthers blindly groped their way forward through the muddy terrain, they were completely unaware that they were being funneled into kill zones established by Combat Command A of the 4th Armoured Division. Waiting in a shallow depression near the town of Arracourt was a platoon of 4 M18 Hellcat tank destroyers from the 704th Tank Destroyer Battalion, commanded by Lieutenant Edwin Leiper. Leiper positioned his thinly armoured hot rods in a classic reverse slope defence. This is a tactic where the defending force positions itself on the backside of a hill, hiding from the enemy's line of sight, until the attacking force crests the ridge. This is the exact same tactical brilliance displayed by American General Daniel Morgan at the Battle of Cowpens during the Revolutionary War, where he used the terrain to draw the disciplined British infantry into a devastating point-blank volley. As the first German Panthers crested the hill in front of Leiper's position, their guns were pointed uselessly at the sky, and their thin lower hull armour was completely exposed. The Hellcats opened fire from a range of barely 150 yards. The roar of the 76mm high-velocity guns shattered the morning air. At this suicidal range, the American armour-piercing rounds did not just penetrate the German tanks. They unleashed absolute hell inside the crew compartments. When a solid armour-piercing projectile punches through steel, it creates a phenomenon known as spalling. The kinetic energy turns the inner layer of the tank's own armour into a shotgun blast of white-hot, razor-sharp shrapnel that ricochets violently around the interior. Within seconds, 3 Panthers were transformed into burning funeral pyres, their ammunition cooking off in spectacular, catastrophic explosions that blew their turrets completely off the hulls. Panic began to grip the inexperienced German crews. Lacking infantry, support to scout the woods and ravines, and unable to see where the incoming fire was originating, the German formations began to break down. Panthers started maneuvering erratically, exposing their vulnerable side armour, which was only 40mm thick and easily penetrable by the standard 75mm guns of the American Shermans. By 1000 hours, the fog began to burn off in small, localized patches, revealing a battlefield littered with burning German steel. General Manteuffel, realizing his spearhead was being chewed to pieces, desperately pushed the 113th Panzer Brigade forward to reinforce the attack. But the American response was swift, merciless, and mathematically precise. Colonel Bruce Clarke, commanding Combat Command A, did not just rely on his tanks to win the battle. He unleashed the full, terrifying weight of American field artillery. The 191st Field Artillery Battalion, equipped with 105mm self-propelled howitzers, was tied directly into the armoured radio networks. American artillery doctrine in World War II was arguably the most advanced and responsive in the world. They utilized a technique known as time on target, or TOT, instead of firing independently. Multiple artillery batteries miles apart would calculate the flight time of their shells and synchronize their firing chords so that every single high explosive shell from dozens of guns would impact the target area at the exact same fraction of a second. Why would a commander order his tanks to charge without infantry or artillery support? Because Hitler demanded a breakthrough, and the German military apparatus was no longer capable of coordinating complex combined arms operations on the fly. When the American TOT barrages slammed into the German columns, the results were catastrophic. For the buttoned-up Panthers, the heavy artillery fire stripped away their radio antennas, shattered their external optics, and blew the tracks off their running gear, turning them into stationary pillboxes. For the soft-skinned German supply trucks and the few accompanying grenadiers caught in the open, the air-bursting shells created a localized meat grinder. The slaughter continued into the afternoon of September 19th. Shifting toward a critical geographical feature known as Hill 318. In the rolling plains of Lorraine, a hill of even modest elevation dictates the entire flow of the battle, providing a platform for artillery observers to see for miles. The Germans threw everything they had at Hill 318. Desperate to secure a vantage point, to untangle their chaotic offensive. Elements of the German 111th Panzer Brigade managed to claw their way up the muddy slopes, establishing a precarious foothold. But the Americans counterattacked with a ferocity that stunned the German commanders. Sherman tanks from the 37th Tank Battalion, under the overall command umbrella of the legendary Lieutenant Colonel Creighton Abrams, roared up the hill in a synchronized assault. The Americans employed white phosphorus rounds, firing them directly at the frontal armor of the defending Panthers. While white phosphorus could not penetrate the armor, the burning chemical created a thick, suffocating smoke that was sucked directly into the Panther's engine intakes and crew ventilation systems. Gagging and blinded, German crews were forced to abandon their invincible machines, only to be cut down by the coaxial machine gun fire of the advancing Shermans. The fighting around Hill 318 devolved into a brutal seesaw struggle of attrition, with the ground changing hands multiple times over 48 hours. The mud became mixed with oil, blood, and the shattered remnants of heavy machinery. Manteuffel was bleeding his precious Panzer Brigades dry against a wall of flexible, intelligently commanded American armor. But as the calendar turned to September 22nd, the heavy skies over Lorraine began to lighten, and the barometer began to rise. The thick fog that had leveled the playing field and forced the Germans into a deadly close-quarters brawl was finally dissipating, and the skies were clearing for the first time in days. The American armored crews looked up through their open hatches, hearing a sound that brought absolute terror to the German High Command, a sound that meant the true apex predators of the European theatre were about to join the slaughter. That deafening roar echoing from the heavens was the sound of the Pratt and Whitney R-2800 double wasp radial engines. It was the signature mechanical heartbeat of the Republic P-47 Thunderbolt, the most devastating single-engine ground attack aircraft of the Second World War. With the thick fog finally breaking and the cloud ceiling lifting, the 19th Tactical Air Command, under the aggressive leadership of General Otto P. Weyland, was unleashed upon the exposed German armour like a swarm of angry hornets. The Thunderbolt, affectionately known by its pilots as the Jug, was a flying tank that tipped the scales at over 17,000 pounds, fully loaded. It was armed with 850 caliber M2 Browning machine guns, capable of putting out a literal wall of armour-piercing incendiary lead. But the true nightmare for the German Panzer crews was what the P-47 carried under its wings. These aircraft were armed with 5-inch high-velocity aircraft rockets, or HVRs, alongside 500-pound general-purpose bombs. What happens when 45 tons of supposedly invincible German steel meets a 5-inch rocket travelling at over 1,000 feet per second? The result is instantaneous, catastrophic vaporization. The Panther tank was heavily armoured on its frontal glacis, but its top armour, covering the turret roof and the engine deck, was a mere 16 millimetres thick. It was paper-thin against aerial munitions. As the Thunderbolts rolled into near-vertical dives, screaming out of the sun, the inexperienced German crews panicked. Instead of maintaining discipline and seeking concealment in the dense tree lines, many drivers threw their tanks into reverse, or tried to speed across the open, muddy fields of Lorraine, making themselves perfectly silhouetted targets against the green and brown earth. The American pilots did not even need direct hits to disable the heavy German beasts. A near miss from a 500-pound bomb would create a shockwave so immense that it could flip a Panther on its side, shear off its suspension road wheels, or permanently deafen and concuss the crew inside. The arrival of the American air power turned a tactical defeat into a mechanized slaughter. The German supply trucks, the soft-skinned Opel Blitzes carrying the precious fuel and ammunition the Panzer Brigades desperately needed, were systematically hunted down and strafed into burning wreckage. This relentless aerial bombardment perfectly mirrors the absolute devastation inflicted upon the retreating Iraqi Republican Guard along the Highway of Death during Operation Desert Storm in 1991. In both instances, an armoured force caught moving in the open without organic air cover was completely dismantled by American pilots operating with total air supremacy. The slaughter at Arracourt provides profound strategic and tactical lessons that completely rewrite the popular narrative of World War II armoured combat. For decades, armchair historians and Hollywood movies have perpetuated the myth that the German Panther and Tiger tanks were technologically superior superweapons, while the American Sherman was a mass-produced death trap. Arracourt proves that a tank is not a solitary gladiator. It is merely one component in a vast, interconnected weapon system. The German military in late 1944 had become obsessed with the single-arm focus, believing that heavily armored, highly lethal individual tanks could win battles by themselves. They built the Panther to win a one-on-one duel on a spreadsheet. The American military, however, built an entire logistical and combined arms ecosystem. The United States Army understood that a tank without fuel is a pillbox, a tank without infantry is a target, and a tank without artillery and air support is a coffin. We can look back at the Battle of the Little Bighorn in 1876 to see the fatal consequences of ignoring combined arms and reconnaissance. George Armstrong Custer divided his 7th Cavalry, charged blindly into unknown terrain without proper intelligence, and was annihilated by a numerically superior, highly motivated Lakota and Cheyenne force. General Hasso von Manteuffels' Panzer Brigades suffered a modern, mechanized version of Custer's last stand. They were thrown blindly into the fog, without infantry scouts to clear the anti-tank ambushes, without artillery to suppress the American guns, and without the logistical tail to sustain a prolonged fight. They were cut off, surrounded, and systematically destroyed by a force that operated with absolute tactical harmony. To truly grasp the magnitude of the American victory, we must look beyond the crosshairs and examine the multidimensional aspects of the battle, starting with the invisible war of intelligence. While the fog of Lorraine blinded the American pilots for days, the Allied High Command was never truly flying blind. Deep in the English countryside at Bletchley Park, Allied codebreakers had cracked the German Enigma encryption machine, creating the intelligence network known as Ultra. Through Ultra intercepts, General George S. Patton and his staff knew that a massive German armoured build-up was occurring opposite the Third Army's flank. They did not know the exact minute the attack would launch, but they knew the hammer was falling. This strategic foresight allowed Major General John S. Wood to position his 4th Armoured Division not in a static, rigid defensive line, but in a flexible, coiled posture, ready to absorb the blow and strike back. This use of signal intelligence to set a devastating ambush is exactly what Admiral Chester Nimitz achieved at the Battle of Midway in 1942. By trusting the codebreakers at Station Hypo, Nimitz knew exactly where the Japanese carriers would be, allowing him to position his own forces to strike a fatal blow against a numerically superior enemy. Arracourt was Patton's Midway on land, a battle where superior intelligence allowed American commanders to dictate the terms of the engagement. Then, there is the brutal mathematics of logistics and economics. The American industrial machine was a marvel of the modern world, operating on a scale that Nazi Germany could not even begin to comprehend. The factories in Detroit, Michigan, and Lima, Ohio, were churning out M4 Shermans by the thousands, utilizing standardized parts, assembly line efficiency, and robust engineering. If an American Sherman threw a track or blew a transmission at Arracourt, an M32 tank recovery vehicle, a specialized armored tow truck, would drag it back to a field maintenance depot. American ordnance battalions, working around the clock under floodlights, could swap out a Sherman's entire engine block in a matter of hours, putting that tank back into the fight the very next day. How do you defeat an enemy whose destroyed tanks seemingly rise from the dead 24 hours later? The Germans simply could not. The Panther tank was an artisanal piece of machinery, over-engineered and incredibly difficult to repair in the field. To replace the transmission on a Panther, German mechanics had to physically remove the roof of the driver's compartment and lift the entire assembly out with a heavy crane, a piece of equipment rarely available on the front lines. Furthermore, the German economy was collapsing under the weight of Allied strategic bombing. The Ruhr Valley was in ruins, and the synthetic oil plants at Leuna and Ploesti had been reduced to rubble. Even when the Panthers survived the American guns at Arracourt, many were simply abandoned by their crews because they ran out of gasoline, leaving pristine 45-ton war machines sitting silently in the French mud. Politically, the battle highlighted the stark contrast in leadership styles between the two warring nations. Adolf Hitler was a micromanager who sat in a bunker hundreds of miles away, moving imaginary divisions on a map and demanding rigid adherence to impossible orders. He commanded Manteuffel to attack regardless of the tactical reality on the ground, stripping his field commanders of any operational flexibility. On the American side, the chain of command empowered aggressive, competent officers at the lowest levels. General Patton trusted General Wood. Wood trusted Colonel Bruce Clarke, and Clarke trusted men like Lieutenant Colonel Creighton Abrams to make split-second, life-or-death decisions based on the immediate situation. This decentralized command structure, a hallmark of American military doctrine, allowed the U.S. forces to react instantly to the chaotic, fluid nature of the battlefield, exploiting German mistakes the moment they happened. When the smoke finally cleared over the battered hills and ruined farming villages of Arracourt on September 29, 1944, the butcher's bill was staggering, and the numbers defied all conventional military logic. The German 5th Panzer Army had launched roughly 262 tanks and assault guns into the offensive. By the end of the 11-day slaughter, they had lost an estimated 86 tanks completely destroyed, with another 114 heavily damaged or abandoned due to lack of fuel and spare parts. 2 entire Panzer Brigades were effectively wiped off the German order of battle, their combat power reduced to zero. The American 4th Armored Division, fighting outnumbered and supposedly outgunned, lost just 25 medium tanks and 7 light tanks. It was a kill ratio that completely shattered the aura of German armored invincibility. The Battle of Arracourt was not just a tactical victory. It was a strategic masterpiece that secured the flank of the Third Army and paved the way for the eventual push into the German homeland. It proved that superior training, flawless combined arms integration, reliable logistics, and aggressive leadership will always triumph over heavy armor and desperate fanaticism. War is never simply a contest of whose machine has the thickest steel or the biggest gun. It is a brutal, unforgiving test of the entire system that supports that machine, and the unwavering resolve of the men who drive it into the fire. Which factor do you believe was the most critical in the American victory at Arracourt? A. The superior combined arms doctrine and artillery integration. B. The arrival of the P-47 Thunderbolts, breaking the German armor. C. The mechanical reliability and fast turret speed of the American Sherman. Let us know your choice and your reasoning in the comments below.